Hi, Scott Seaton here, music director of the North State Symphony, and today is a special interview with local composer Trevor Lloyd. Trevor, welcome. How are you doing?
Great, thank you.
Well, today we're gonna learn about you. We're gonna hear from you about how you got into composing, how you got into composition, and maybe music as a whole. And then we have two specific pieces that we're going to talk about today, and that our North State audience will have an opportunity to hear. So, to start out, where are you from, and how did you get into music?
Well, I was born in Michigan, but I like to say I'm basically a Californian. Since I was 6 years old, I've been in California.
So you're born in Michigan.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
at?
Dearborn, Michigan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sort of from Michigan as well. So
Yeah.
I have family in the Dearborn area. My mom is from Port Huron, so
Uh-huh.
that's interesting to know. Okay, so Michigan, then what?
My dad built cars, so
Uh-huh. Makes sense
Uh,
for that area.
yeah. Um, well, I guess as far as how I got into music, I heard Isaac Stern playing a piece of music on a phonograph record that my parents had, and I can't remember the name of the piece he played, but I said, "Well, that's an interesting sound. It's very expressive." Up until that time, I had just listened to basically Beatles. I was I was 6 years old, so um,
You could do
but
worse.
yeah. But then when I was 9, I was convinced because I heard History of a Soldier, and I said, "That's what I want to do. I want to do that sort of cross between jazz and classical and make the violin bounce and groove."
Mhm.
Um, it took about 10 years for me to actually get down to it. 10 years of just strictly classical practicing and etudes and the usual Beethoven, Bach and Mozart to learn the violin.
Mhm. So was violin your first instrument, or was piano your first instrument?
I like to say violin was I would plunk around on the piano, not knowing what I was doing before I picked up the violin. I didn't get serious about composing on the piano until about 13.
Oh, all right. Okay, well, um, much more serious than I was at 13. But so and what age did you pick up violin?
9.
Wow, okay. Was this are you a product of the public school system, or did your parents want to get
Yeah,
you in? Okay.
public school system. And oddly enough, it was third grade. They showed us pictures of instruments.
Mhm.
And not knowing at the time that what I was looking at was what Isaac Stern played, I said, "That instrument looks cool. Let's play that one. It's got nice curves in it." And so yeah, I started at third grade, I suppose, and we actually had little mini orchestras in elementary school back then.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I started saxophone in 5th grade in
uh-huh.
Michigan. So, but that was the earliest that we could do anything. So that's great that you were able to do it even earlier than I was.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so you mentioned the Beatles, but and everyone will hear this when they listen to your works, but it's you also do have a very heavy jazz influence. And how did that start for you?
Well, in high school, a lot of my friends were going to Gentle Giant concerts. I don't know if you ever heard of them,
I don't think so.
which is progressive rock, and they threw in a lot of jazz. The
Uh,
drummer of that band, John P. Withers, I think his name is, would play all these jazz riffs, and they'd play rock grooves on top of it. And I thought, well, that's an interesting mix. And then sometimes they would introduce a mellotron, which gave it a classical feel too.
uh,
That along with all the progressive bands of the day, King Crimson, early Genesis, yes, I was listening to while practicing strictly classical music. By the time I was 19, I met this guitar player, James Musser, who sounded a lot like John McLaughlin, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, that sort of feel. And he got me into Jean-Luc Ponty and his style of playing
mhm.
the violin. So after about 5 years of just completely falling on my face, trying to improvise like him, eventually through process of elimination, I discovered what works as far as melody lines. And that's the first time I actually started thinking about melody. I would write grooves on the piano,
Mhm.
rhythms and chord progressions. just that went on forever. I had one piece that was an hour and a half long.
Really?
I've since reduced that down to 35 minutes, the essentials. But I didn't put a melody on it until 10 years ago. And I think that, you know, I have this impression that a lot of classical composers, or a lot of composers in general, start with the melody first. For me,
Mm,
melody is last. And
interesting.
it's because I've spent so many years jamming with folk bands and jazz bands and country, of course. I actually almost started making some money with country
Oh,
before
really?
it scared me. I said, no, that's not the direction I want to go.
Uh-huh.
But I do. I like some of the elements. So even the elements of country I put into my melodies. But then I had all these progressions lying around on the computer and chord changes that had no melody. But after 20 years of improvising over other people's progressions, it
Right.
became a joy to, oh, this could go there. And then the melody started shaping which progressions to use and how often to use them,
Right.
which should be the major themes. And the way I write is I always start out with like 20 minutes of music and cut it down to 7 over a period of
Mm.
weeks. I can't seem to get lower than 7 minutes.
Right, right. Yeah, I've listened to a fair amount of your music, and you and I share a similar taste in and sort of creating these or appreciating these grooves and these intense rhythmic textures, and and some of your music, I love obviously the jazz infusion. Being a saxophonist, I love the
Yeah,
minimalist element. Some of your music sounds very cinematic. When you finally do get to that melodic point,
yeah,
there's something about it, or some of it, and also having played back when I was a kid a fair amount of video games, there is some of that is there as well,
right.
which
Some humor. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, you're a
yeah,
very diverse composer, and I also
thank you.
really like that. You can be going along in these grooves, and then you have these sudden harmonic shifts in some of your music, and I really
Yeah,
I think that's really neat, unexpected. I like
yeah.
when there's a hint of going somewhere where we don't expect to go. Um, so you've already kind of touched on this, but walk us through your method of composition. How do you start? Is it you say you create these things, but is it always at the piano? Walk us through when the idea comes to when the piece is done.
Okay. Probably 90% of the stuff I've written, maybe 95, has been on the piano to begin with.
Mhm.
Um, and basically, I just mess around with chords to begin with, and I like a certain combination of chords, and then I'll start messing around with breaking up the chords into rhythms. Um, and then the often I write in odd meters, and to me that it's easy to do because all you're doing really is taking away a beat or adding a beat. And to me, that suggests a cool different syncopation, where syncopation becomes like, the anticipation of a beat becomes the beat, or even melodically, where like, I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyway, I get these chords written, and then I start piecing them together, which ones go where, and often they'll suggest many different places to me. Um, After I have about 15 minutes worth, I'll listen to the whole thing on computer and think to myself, okay, that's the major theme. That should be heard 3 times. This one should be heard 2 times. So which transition works for those things to work together that way?
Mm.
Every now and then I have to sacrifice. I have a really cool transition. I want to hear it twice. And I say to myself, no, that would make it twice as long if I heard that transition twice.
All right.
At the very last stage, I'll start improvising to it on the piano to begin with. And I'll have like 5 or 6 tracks. I use the computer all the time. I'll have like 5 or 6 tracks that I'll pick and choose from that I think are the most catchy, or that mean the best with, that make the most sense with these chord progressions and are catchy at the same time,
Mhm.
to me anyway. When that's all done, when I finally picked what I think sounds best, and I repeat the themes I think need to be repeated the most melodically, then I'll start playing the violin and thinking to myself, well, what nuances can I put in here? Then I'll change things here and there to put trills, or break it up to make it sound a little more human than the computer on keyboard sounds.
Right.
And
How
what I use for examples, I'm addicted to these 1995 samples of piano and oboe. So everything that I compose, I have a bunch of oboe tracks and piano. So it takes a bit for me to, I play violin, I go, oh, okay, that suggests a whole different set of things, but it still has a jazz element that, a bouncy oboe that I can imagine being a saxophone, or, all sorts of wind instruments. All this it bends things so that into a different direction when you put it on strings. Somehow it sounds more somber or more serious, I guess.
Right, absolutely. So, how do you, or maybe you don't at all, maybe it's just a feel and with the piece, but how do you think about structure when you're composing?
Um, Actually, it's a long process where I
Hmm.
just listen and listen and listen, and I think to myself, well, okay, that really needs to be, as I say, heard 2 or 3 times. So I'll put it in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, and then I'll try to dance around the other things, in between that to have them make sense.
Hmm.
I don't set out with a structure at all.
Okay.
It's kind of like when people say they write a novel, they don't know where they're going. They write the first chapter, and, oh, I guess you'll say this now. That's kind of how I write.
So it's more, what's the term? Through composed. It's more of
Yeah,
you go where your ear feels you need to go.
yeah. And then
Okay.
in the end, my critical mind goes, no, that's too far. That's too much.
Well, we're going to highlight two of your pieces, so maybe we can start by talking a little bit about your string quartet Child's Play.
Okay.
So, where did this come about? Where did the idea? Where was the genesis from?
Um, well, let's see, where did I start with that? Um, I got addicted to that, just the first groove, for a long time on the piano.
Hmm.
And when it landed at a certain place, when I felt, well, I needed a change of pace here, it seemed to suggest to me a certain Genesis element, a certain Phil Collins type melody came to mind
Yeah.
at the slower section. I said, okay, well, let's go with that. And then I kind of got lost. How do I get back to that major bouncy thing? So I had to do a third transition. So
Uh-huh.
I funked around with that for a while. Um, and of course, the ending always takes me the longest. I always have to figure, well, how can I make this ending not normal, but not too weird, and sum it up in a way that kind of leaves a half question, half statement, half question. Um, and the melody, I didn't really like the melody at first. I thought, well, it's really simple. But then I
Hmm.
thought, well, the comp part, as we used to say, on the keys, is tricky enough that the mind goes there, and so a simple melody might complement that. And oddly enough, I had in mind saxophone
Oh
originally.
yeah.
Yeah, and I thought, well, let's just try it. Let's see if I can, for the pandemic. Let's see if I can narrow things down to the players I can get on hand, and see if I
uh,
can make it work with strings. And of course, the three guys that helped me on it are just amazing.
uh-huh.
It was an interesting mix with the three people I took, because I feel like Michael Eby on violin has a very classical sound. He's got that rich vibrato that really, strikes me as classical. And Anthony Pocari on cello, he has a rock feel for a classical player. I feel, he bounces really well. He has
Yeah.
that gritty thing that for years and actually for this piece, I started out thinking of it as a band piece. So I would write bass parts to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So originally, I guess if I go back to the beginning, I had a bass part, a keyboard part, and a sax part.
Hmm.
And for the string quartet, I said, well, and a drum part. So I got rid of the drum part, thinking, well, how can I make that as percussive with string quartet?
Right.
And I said, well, it's got to be the left hand, which is the cello,
Hmm.
left hand of the piano, which is the cello.
Right.
And Anthony just came to mind right away. I said, well, he can bounce the hell out of this, and
Yeah. Yeah, he's so fun to work with, and all the musicians in that piece are such great musicians. And so when listening to this piece, what are the highlights for you? Like, what would you tell someone? This is my favorite part. Here's why you need to hear it.
um, actually, I think that there's like the third theme, the theme that sounds like a chorus
Hmm.
that comes, and it happens twice. Um, I think that's the most exciting part of the piece. It's there's a fast part and a slow part, but the next fast part is really what originally I had thought about putting lyrics to that part only.
Oh, really? Hmm.
Yeah, and it was going to be just a simple nursery type. It was going to be about two mice in a garden, actually, which is odd. I was going to try to make it into a kind of a bouncy, happy, theme for that part. So yes, I would say that part mainly.
Well,
Everything
wonderful.
else justifies that part.
Well, I can't wait for them to hear it. And so the second piece that we're going to chat about is called Windswept Alley Dance, and this is for piano trio.
Yeah.
Um, so so how new is this piece? And again, where did this idea come from?
This piece is relatively newer, 2009, the piano part. I
Uh-huh.
wrote the melody for it a couple years ago.
Oh, you did?
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, and this one I actually had written a piano trio for. I was going to have Barbara and her husband, Barbara DeGolli, and her husband play soprano sax
Hmm.
and bassoon and piano, and I was reluctant to actually transpose it for string instruments. I thought, well, it's not gonna have that the jazz feel I want. But when I heard it with Anthony and Michael, I said, wow, that really puts a spiritual element behind it as well. I'm not trying to downgrade what woodwind can do. It was a whole different. Oh wow, maybe I can do everything for a piano trio, and the
Right.
freedom the piano trio gives you. I mean, you can do everything an orchestra can do with 30 fingers total, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
absolutely. No,
yeah,
this has been a huge year for discovering the enormous possibility of small chamber ensembles, and I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah.
much more of the world is familiar with the realm of chamber music than even 18 months ago. So that's
Yeah.
exciting for accessibility for people, having more options to hear different you know um, ways classical music and art music can be represented. So
Uh-huh.
so that's at least a positive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So once
I had to shift it up a couple steps so the cello could play the lowest note. You have to do those sort of things with orchestrations as well, with how low the tuba can go and all that. Yeah.
Right, right. So Windswept Alley Dance, it for me, it starts a little somber, a little sort of inward, very sort of atmospheric in the beginning, but it still has this enormous rhythmic underpinning. Um, so in this piece, again, what should people listen for? What are the big moments for you?
I think the mood change, the happy part that comes up, and then
Which you
for
really appreciate at that point, because
yeah, yeah, and then getting probably even more than that is getting back to the somber. I do some more what would you call it? Well, it's harmonic minor. Um, back down into it, some diminished scales. I like that falling back sort of quality. I cheat a lot. I have to admit with diminished scales, because you can go anywhere with them. If you're lost, stick in a diminished scale. If it works, I'll
right.
try that at first. Or sometimes whole tone scale can take you some places too. Uh,
I hear the
there's
chromatic scale is pretty
some
accessible
hard
too.
transitions to
No, that's good. That's good. Well, again, really exciting stuff. And if people want to hear more of your works, tell us where they go.
on October 3, house concert. It's called the In the House series with Lizanne Fowler
Okay.
in Chico, and I'm going to be playing violin for my piano trios,
Oh, great.
and Diego Bustamante will be on keyboard,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
Anthony on cello. So
Oh,
I'm looking forward to
that's
that. That will
yeah.
be much more fun for me because I feel a lot freer and at home performing on the violin. Piano, I
Hmm.
really have to work on and concentrate. For years, I went back and forth. I would be good on the piano and then good on the violin. I don't seem to be good on both at the same time. For 10 years, so 10 years, I'll be good on the keyboard. Then 10 years, I'm good. So now I'm at the end of the 10 years where I'm better on the violin. So I think I'll stick here for performing anyway.
Well, as long as you're having fun. So,
Yeah.
so this concert will be where?
Yeah. I don't have the exact address, but it would be in Chico.
But they'll be able to find it on your website.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Wonderful.
The northeast quadrant of Chico.
And I guess one of my final questions, just because I'm curious, what is your favorite combination of instruments to write for? Do you prefer writing for orchestra, or do you prefer small groups? How is that sort of transformed for you?
I prefer writing for orchestra.
Hmm.
There's just so much, so many places you can go, so much color to experiment with.
Right.
Um, and oddly, as a string player, I'm really attracted to the sound of woodwinds.
Hmm.
I don't, since melody comes last for me. I think there aren't as many um, exciting moments for strings in my orchestral pieces as there are for woodwinds.
Hmm.
Just I think just because I really enjoy the diversity of the tones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's such a huge color palette with an
Yeah,
orchestra, and I really hope we can all get back to hearing orchestras really, really soon.
yeah, me too. Yeah. I was going to mention I didn't mention Joel Quivy I on viola for the quartets. Um, I really think he was a good choice because he has that he also plays in the mariachi band.
Oh
He's
yeah.
also the concertmaster of Paradise Symphony, which is where I met him, and I've been trying to get him to do my pieces for years. So to have him jump on the viola, and violas are so hard to find these days, was a great relief, and I thought it came out really well.
Oh, great. Yeah, Joel is certainly an enormous local asset and a man of many talents.
Yes,
Yeah, hopefully we can do a mariachi concert at the symphony some point. But
yeah, it's an
yeah,
idea.
absolutely. Well, Trevor, again, it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you a little bit and getting to know more about your background. And I look forward to the North State community hearing your pieces and becoming more familiar with your work. So thanks for taking the time and sitting here with me today.
And thank you for the opportunity. Yes.
My pleasure. We'll talk soon. Thanks, Trevor.
Okay. Take care.